Hello there, welcome back to my Pauper Flophouse of Fun. Today we're playing an old classic type of deck, the Stompy archetype. Stompy, as you can see here, being a mono green beatdown deck. Mono color decks, popular in basically all forms in Pauper. So the defining features of these decks are extremely low land count, even for Pauper. Like there's 16 lands here. There's tons of 1-drops, a smattering of 2-drops, and like a bunch of pump spells. So it's not quite the same as the actual classic Stompy decks. There's no land grant, for example, but it's pretty similar. So the makeup of the deck is the same, mostly a bunch of 1-drops that you wanna play out. The creatures have a mixture of evasion and resilience. Out with like Nettle Sentinel, which doesn't really evade and isn't particularly resilient either, but it's it's a 2/2 for a single green. Pit Skulk has a certain kind of evasion. Young Wolf is resilient. Vault Scourge is evasive and has lifelink, which is something you can't normally get too often in green. Nest Invader is fairly resilient since it brings spawn to eat up edicts, and can even the Eldrazi spawn can wear Rancors and stuff. Riverboa is occasionally evasive and resilient. There's a Miser Sheenan of Life's Roar, which is like a house in like creature-based matchups, because if you like suit this guy up and you can like assassinate their whole team, or as its primary purpose in life rather is to act as a lure, so you just attack and they have to block everything on this while your other dudes beat down. So why would you want to play this deck over something like Affinity or like a burn deck if you want to be aggressive, or even like Delver or anything? Honestly, I think a big part of the reason why this deck is quite good, and maybe better than it looks to some, is that there are honestly not very many effective sideboard cards against this. People's sideboards are filled with artifact destruction, they're filled with hydroblasts and pyroblasts. There's a bunch of like anti-enchantment stuff out there, but there's honestly not that many cards that are just good against a pile of green creatures. So people don't have that many things to sideboard in. And I think it's actually surprisingly effective at killing people. It actually plays a little bit like Affinity sometimes in like Modern or whatever. Because the amount of times that your opponents think they're stabilizing, and then you just squeeze in enough damage with some 1/1s and Vault Scourges with a bunch of stuff on it. One of the cards that's actually very important for this deck is Quirion Ranger, since returning forests to your hand is basically like getting extra mana out of it in this deck. Since you only have 16 lands, you quite often keep 1-landers with Quirion Ranger and then use that to power out 2 mana worth of spells a turn. And the untapping effect is actually pretty useful against other creature decks. So you can just dominate combat sometimes if they're playing smaller creatures than you. The packets of 4 damage pump spells are basically just like giant lava axes in this type of deck. And there are some other pump spells to help you get through blockers. I don't think this deck would work if Rancor was illegal. You can still win matches, of course, without ever drawing a Rancor, but I think Rancor is one of the big reasons to play this deck. This is such a powerful effect. You get so much value for a single green. One card that has impressed me since starting playing the deck is Hunger of the Howlpack. I honestly didn't think it was going to be that great when I started. But the amount of times where you're just attacking with a bunch of stuff and something dies and you make one of your random evasive monsters just big enough to get past their defenses and kill them is higher than I thought. It's not always great, but at the worst case scenario, you can, use it as a battle growth and win a combat and have a slightly bigger creature. Best case scenario is when they, try and get a little bit of damage in a tight race. You block with, say, a Young Wolf or something, and then you play Hunger the Howl Pack on Vault Scourge, and then suddenly you have a 4/4 lifelinker. Yeah, the deck is reasonably straightforward. There's quite a lot of play in the matches themselves for trying to get the damage through. Over in Sideboard land, I've got a fairly straightforward, fairly stock sideboard card here, I think. Fairly stock sideboard, at least. There's a bunch of Scattershot Archers, which is quite good against decks with a bunch of 1/1 spirits, for example, and it's quite good against like Fairy Miscreants and Spellstutter Sprites. Obviously, the blue cards are what you really want them for, since they're much more popular. But it's a 1-mana green creature. It beats down until it's useful. We have some Elephant Guides for when you just want the biggest creature possible, and gives you a certain amount of resilience even if your thing dies. I honestly would consider playing some of these main deck if like Vapor Snag wasn't such a huge part of the format. It is actually just a very strong card whenever you resolve one, but it being blown out by commonly played bounce spells against mono blue is not where you want to be, but I certainly wouldn't be unhappy with one. We have some epic confrontations for like the green mirror matches, or times where they've got Sparksmith and things like that. It's possible that there should be 4 of these, considering how important they are against decks like Elves, where you sort of really want to kill a Well-Wisher, but you also really want to kill a Timberwatch Elf, and so on and so forth. We're not particularly favoured against Elves, I'm pretty sure, even though I haven't lost to it yet somehow. Just never drawn Well-Wishers. We have 4 Gleeful Sabotage, because they're great against both Affinity and Boggles. Now obviously Affinity can sometimes just play Somber Hoverguards and non-artifact 4/4s and Atogs. So this isn't as great as it seems, but sometimes you'll destroy their first 2 lands and then they won't play anything else for the rest of the game. So that's nice. And finally we have some Tangle. I think people bring these in a little bit more than they should, but I like them against the Blitz decks and the Hexproof decks, since I don't think you can realistically beat those decks without getting them with a Tangle. And it's not awful against like the Mirror Match either. Although I tend not to bring it in against things like Affinity, because a lot of the times when you're losing against Affinity, it's because they make too many 4/4s and you don't have enough board presence, and you probably just can't kill them anyway, even if you get them a little bit with a Tangle. Obviously, if you ever get them in an Atog all-in situation, but I don't think I've ever seen a situation where that would come up. Although it'll probably come up in this upcoming league. So yeah, that is Stompy. I'm gonna go to battle with it right now, in fact. See you in round 1.